Morning, everybody. Happy first day of the school holidays. And welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by my fellow, I don't know if you are a Mirror columnist, I'm my fellow Mirror columnist and associate editor, bracket showbiz, I think, whatever it might be, Jessica Boulton. Morning, Jess.
Morning, Susie. Lovely to see you this morning.
Someone's perky, isn't she? Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast are just going to turn on Netflix and hope the children stay quiet. So, what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on an investigation which has found that Home Secretary Suella Braverman has been getting us to pay the energy bills at her family home in a fresh new MP's expenses scandal. More on the detail on that a bit later. But first, I want to go to page 8 of today's paper. And there's news that 15,000 children's operations have been axed over the past year. Now, Jessica, it says here that one poor child's been waiting 3 years for surgery on their ears. Now, that may be fairly minor, non-life-threatening op, but if it's serious enough to need surgery, it must be affecting their daily lives. For that constantly being cancelled must be no good for that child and their family. But this isn't all a result of the recent wave of strikes, is it? This is other issues that are causing some of this.
It is. And a lot of it goes back to the sort of, they're blaming the government funding. This has come from a Lib Dem freedom of information request to find out about the delays here. And a lot of it, they're saying, is to do with the past 13 years now of Tory cuts to the NHS and the ongoing problems there. That case you mentioned, it was a poor kid. It is 1,000 days on the waiting list for an ear operation. Now, when you're a child, that's 3 years of school where you're there, with something wrong with you, waiting. The parents are anxious about it. I mean, in that case, you'd hope that it's not affecting their daily lives so much that it's so detrimental that it's affected a big chunk of their childhood. But there's kids on this list waiting for all sorts of things, and I mean it's a shocking indictment, really, isn't it?
It is, rather. I mean, it might be something fairly minor like having your ears pinned back, but the reason you might need your ears pinned back is because you're getting bullied. And there could be something else that's slightly wrong with the look of the ear or how it's functioning, and it's not going to kill you, but it really does need fixing sooner rather than later. What do you think, everybody? Do you think that these delays are all part of perhaps the Tory underfunding? Do you think that there's something to do with the pandemic involved here, or perhaps the strikes aren't helping it? Let us know. Now, these figures, like you said, Jess, were gathered by the Liberal Democrats, obviously in an effort to prove the Tories can't look after us. But some of the figures in it are really illuminating. So while there's 2,894 operations that were cancelled due to a lack of staff, and staff shortages have been in the NHS since long before the strikes. In fact, they're one of the reasons for the strikes. 4,000 were cancelled due to a lack of beds. And again, that's also a lack of staff because you need so many nurses per bed to actually operate them. But 1,100 were cancelled because theatres were overbooked, and 446 for a problem with the equipment. Now, we all know there's long waiting lists, don't we? Post-pandemic, a lot of us have sort of, I suppose, steeled ourselves a bit for there being a bit of a delay while the NHS clears its backlog. But if there's no bed, the equipment's faulty, too many people are on the list, not enough staff, what can the NHS reasonably do about it? They can't ever hope to clear the backlog if this is the stuff they're working with.
It's going to get worse and worse. I think there was a story last week about how a lot of the equipment that's being used is from the 80s and 90s for certain types of
It was scanners, MRIs, CAT scans, and X-rays, things like that. They're very old bits of kit.
It's okay if the technology still works. One would think that the technology has moved on. There's an enormous amount of money that goes into the NHS, but it's not enough, and it's not going to the right places. I mean, currently there's 133,000 vacancies. I'm sure everyone watching is aware of maybe their doctor's surgery or down a local hospital where they just can't fill the jobs. Now that's a big point that we got to raise, because it's you can keep giving money, but if we can't get anyone to work there because no one wants to do it, or they can't afford to do it because of the pay, how are we going to fix this problem? That's got to be addressed. Why can't we fill these vacancies?
Well, what do you think, everybody? How do we persuade people to go and work in the NHS when we all know, we all use it, and we all know that it's pretty high stress, and it's really sort of being run a bit on a shoestring. You don't get all the kit and equipment you need. You don't get the support from your bosses. Mistakes can get made. You get sued to hell if that's the case. And of course, you have to pay for your own training and so on to get in there in the first place, because a lot of the bursaries have been cancelled. So the nursing bursary got dropped, that kind of thing, which means you're paying your own student tuition fees. And it should be, really, Jess, you're right. It should be that working in the NHS is the most prestigious job in the UK. And I mean prestige. Whether you are a receptionist, whether you are a porter, whether you are a consultant, you should be getting paid pretty well, I'd have thought, compared to other places where you could be working. And you should be proud of where you're working and what you're doing in that job. And it should be something where other people go, do you know what? Props to you. And we do that to some extent in a lot of places. And, during the pandemic, NHS, and even afterwards, NHS staff get discounts in places and things like that. In a lot of the ways that the armed forces do. But there should just be a cachet, a prestige. You don't have to pay them all £1 million a year, but there should be a reason that people want to work in the NHS, that they feel it's not just a vocation and they want to help, but actually that they feel that they would be doing something which the nation honours rather than kind of complains about, I suppose.
And I mean, obviously, the main thing here is being valued for what they do. People that are going, no one wants to go out on strike. The people that are going out on strike are doing it out of desperation for wanting to be listened to about the various different issues. And as you've addressed, I mean, it's about staff shortages, it's about equipment, it's about the targets they're having to meet. Everything's having to be done on less and less money, and it's not going to work. Someone needs to sit up and go, we've got to stop this now before we ruin what is, should be, like you say, a prestigious thing for our country.
Exactly. Something's got to be done about it, hasn't we? Now, we've got a bit of breaking news for you that's just come in. Teachers, we know that junior doctors are having 4 days of strikes next week, from Easter Sunday onwards. But now teachers have overwhelmingly voted to reject the government's latest pay offer, which means there will be fresh strike action in schools as well. So it's members of the National Education Union, which I think is one of the biggest ones, has voted by 98%.
I mean, it was obviously close there, Cindy, wasn't it?
Yeah,
the 2% that held out. I mean, crikey.
2% went, no, actually we'll fall for this one. No, so the 98% have voted to dismiss the latest wage offer from the government because they've branded it insulting. So it looks like the government is going to have to go back to the table with them, and there's probably going to be strikes in any event called over that. So there's going to be not only these children not getting their operations, Jess, but also not necessarily getting all the schooling they should be getting either.
It's like everything is slowly falling apart here since the pandemic. A lot of countries have thrived in their economy since the pandemic. We haven't, as you know from previous stories. It seems like every single part of the public sector is really, really struggling at the moment. And rightly, people seem to have had enough. And teachers aren't doing this lightly. They're doing it because they feel they've last resort to be heard. so that they get fair pay in a time when our inflation is going through the roof.
Yeah.
And we know why that's happening. So all these things tie in together. And at some point, someone's got to say, do you know what? We're going to have to take a deep hit now, make sure everybody, is paid fairly, and that we're putting resources into things. Because otherwise we're going to be paying a lot of money for things that aren't actually functioning very well.
And they end up, the money all ends up going on agency staff and so on, which just costs far more than it needs to.
Throwing good money after bad. It's time to put a bit more money into it now and make it work properly.
Mm. Now, Mike says, how does this government constantly say they speak for the people when all the evidence points in the opposite direction? Very good point, Mike, and nice segue into the main story that we're going to discuss now, which is, now Jess, I know that your sphere of expertise is showbiz, but bear with us. It's safe to say the lady on the front page today is probably one of the most recognised and famous people in the country. Now, Home Secretary Suella Braverman, known as Cruella to her friends, when the MP expenses scandal broke in 2009, she wasn't even in Parliament. In fact, she didn't get elected until 2015, right? Another 6 years. So perhaps, she didn't realise quite how this was going to look because she wasn't there at the time when it all got very sticky indeed. Speaking from your showbiz perspective, Jess, before we go into the detail of this story, this is basically a very high-profile person getting the taxpayer to fund their energy bill in the middle of an energy crisis. That's just not a good look, is it?
It is not a good look at all. I mean, PR 101. It is, everyone can see that it's an absolute failure on her part. It goes to say, it's not illegal what she's doing. It's just going against the spirit of the law. I mean, is it fair that she is funding her London home energy bills by the taxpayer as her second home, which is what they believe that she is doing, in the middle of an energy crisis when most of us are thinking, can I put the heating on? Should I just put it on for 20 minutes or should I just go and wrap myself in the duvet? And yet the Home Secretary is getting us to pay to heat her £1.2 million home. The incendiary sort of feelings that sort of sums up where we all are with the current sort of the government here and what's been happening in recent years with the sort of, we've had Partygate, we've had all these, we've had all the cuts, we've had the stuff with Matt Hancock. It turned out what they were doing was unlawful. It's just, you think it's reached a peak of sort of hypocrisy or is the sheer brass neck cheek of it, which really is galling. And just as you think it's got as bad as it can be, something else happens, and then this comes up. Maybe
it's because she wasn't there when it all went horribly wrong and just doesn't quite see how this looks. I mean, what do you think, everybody? Get into the comments, ask us your questions. Do you think it's perfectly right that we should be paying Suella Braverman's energy bills on her marital home, right? So the story is, we're going to dive into the detail now so we all understand exactly how this is working. So the detail is that Miss Braverman has done what many MPs did in 2009, which is flip her designated second home several times in order to keep claiming money, right? There's a flipping going on here. We all know what that was. If you're older than about 30, you can remember. So now the rules allow for the running costs to be claimed for a second home in your constituency, or one in London if your main home's in the constituency. You just need to designate which one's your second home. And then, of course, if you're aware of the MP's expenses scandal, you stick to that designation. You don't flip it and change it all the time. But when she first entered Parliament, Suella claimed for a property in Hampshire, in Fareham, where she was elected. But a bit later, it turns out that her parents bought a home in the same area, and Suella now lives there rent-free. So she has a rent-free second home in her constituency, and that has been confirmed. So after that happened, she then switched her designation for the second home to be the marital home, which is in Hertfordshire, more than 100 miles away, where she lives with her husband and her 2 young children. And that is definitely the family home. There is no question about it. And she is claiming for the energy bills on that second home. Now, she could, if you're being reasonable, Jess, what she could have done is perhaps claim for the energy bills on the home in Hampshire, which her parents bought, because that's within the rules. You're allowed to claim the energy costs, right? She's incurring those costs because she's the local constituency MP. That's probably reasonable to claim those costs, but she's not. She's claiming the energy costs. She flipped the designation and she's claiming for the marital home in Hertfordshire. In the past 5 years, she's claimed £5,000 a year, a total of 25 grand from flipping her properties in this way. Now, as you said, Jess, this is technically within the rules, just about, but it stinks, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, she's been talking about cracking down on the so-called benefits culture that she keeps going on about, which, I mean, it's a bit rich, isn't it? When she's doing something like this, I guess she can afford to be a bit rich when you're claiming 25,000 in 5 years. It's just, like I said before, people are out there literally watching every bit of energy they use at the moment, rethinking about whether they can put the heating on, thinking about whether they can put a light on, doing all these sort of silly little things just to save a little bit of money. I mean, I must be not alone in watching the smart meter when you're like boiling the kettle to see how much money that puts on. And we're all aware that this is actually going to cost us. It's so expensive now that these things do make a big difference. Yeah. What time you put the washing machine on makes a big difference.
Exactly. I've been telling my dad off for about a year for reboiling the kettle. He boils it and then wanders off and then comes back and boils it again to make a cup of tea. I'm like, no, just boil it once.
Exactly.
Once is absolutely sufficient. It's like a penny every time. Over the course of a year, it's cost me £3.
All of these things we're thinking about because it is so expensive now, and so to have somebody do this in this time when one of the main cabinet ministers is just like a slap in the face. It's very similar to Partygate. It's kind of one rule for us, one rule for them. We're all suffering. We're all watching the pennies. They're sitting there claiming the money on their marital home because of a loophole. It just makes you so cross in the general public because we can't do much about it apart from call attention to it. But how many other people in government are doing these sorts of things? Wow. It's just against the spirit of the law, but they don't seem to care. No. And that's what hurts.
Yeah, and this is also, remember, this is Suella Braverman. This is a woman who's been saying that we can't afford to have refugees and asylum seekers in this country and they're only coming here for the benefits. Well, let's hope they don't all stand for Parliament, Suella, because then they really will be cashing in. Now, Anne-Marie says, under no circumstances should these MPs be able to flip their homes or claim for the running costs, especially more so during an energy crisis when millions are having to choose between eating or heating. No way should any of them be able to claim for their energy. They're the biggest benefit claimants. Now, Anne-Marie, I think you're quite right in terms of claiming for their energy on the family home where they're raising their children. But if you've got to live in a different place, let's say not Hampshire and Hertfordshire, because she could commute it if she really wanted to. Let's say Cornwall or Wales or Leeds, right? If you've got a second home in either London or Leeds because you're representing Leeds in London and that's where your day job is, I mean, it seems reasonable enough that a flat or something in one of those cities should be funded by the taxpayer because you've got to have it as a result of doing the job to some extent. And if they do so, they don't pay mortgage or mortgage interest payments or anything anymore, because that was something that happened in the expenses scandal. They do pay rent on a flat. But we've got an awful lot of MPs who own a second flat but aren't able to claim the mortgage interest on it, so have gone to rent a flat and are renting out their first one that they own for a profit, and then again the taxpayer to pay the second one. This kind of stuff is a bit smelly, I think. Now, David says, because she's going, hopefully, to stop the migrant invasion. The press are now trying to discredit her. Check out if any Labour MP claimed for household bills. David, as we just said, lots of MPs claim for household bills. That is part of the rules. What is not part of the rules necessarily is flipping your home designation in order to keep claiming the same bills and different properties, even when you are living with your family in the one that the taxpayers funding. That's sort of the issue. But Jess, there are going to be other MPs of other parties as well, aren't they, doing the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be. I understand completely. I mean, people might say, "Oh, this is where these big issues like this, they tend to get away with things because it comes down to people going, oh, you're just going after the Tories, you're just going after Labour, you're just going after Lib Dem, whoever it is that they happen to support, that they think that we're not." Look at the core issue. It doesn't really matter what party they are. This is a politician who is in a high-paid, high-profile job. She has flipped the designation of the second home. The second home is where her children and her husband live, which I think everybody, common sense, that is not your second home. Yeah. It is what I said. It's the sheer nerve. It's the brazenness of it. It's the kind of two fingers up to the normal working person. I can do this kind of attitude because it is technically legal, but it's the effect it has on people, because I sit and look at that and it just makes me so cross. And I don't care what party they're from. We could be talking about a Labour person doing this. If Labour were in power and it was a Labour Home Secretary doing this, I would be saying exactly the same. Or the Green Party or the Lib Dems. It's the fact that people are having this kind of, it's almost like rubbing the salt in the wound. Don't care about the little people, don't care about the normal person on the street who at the end of the month see how much of their tax goes to pay for public services, and we know those public services aren't getting properly funded, and yet there's people there taking the mick with what they can claim, getting away with it, going around the rules, all of this sort of stuff. People that it's just like, it's like saying, oh, well, we can do it and you guys can't, but never mind. It's not nice. It is a slap in the face for normal British public. And that's why we are cross about it.
Yes. And remember, it may well be that some people want to criticise the reason the Mirror might have done this about a Conservative Home Secretary. I don't recall anybody criticising the Telegraph for doing it about many Labour MPs in 2009 and saying that was politically motivated. And I don't recall anyone having a problem with them going after some cabinet ministers as well about expenses claims at the time. And it's worth pointing out, I think it was David, that although this MP is of one particular party, the taxpayer that is funding her energy bills at her family home come from voters of all walks of life. Labour and Tory voters alike are funding her energy bills at her family home. If you're all right with that, then do get back into the comments and let us know that you're all right with that. It does seem a bit much for it to be happening at the family home. It should be the constituency home, in which case we wouldn't have a story. We wouldn't be able to criticise her for this. We'd have to find something else, wouldn't we? I wonder what on earth we could do. Now, keep asking your questions, everybody. What do you think about Suella flipping her home like this? Do you think that there are other issues which are more important? Do you think this is something which perhaps other MPs are going to be found guilty of as well? Because we've got a former watchdog, parliamentary watchdog, Alistair Graham in the paper, who says it looks like an attempt to game the rules. He's saying here, it looks like they've obviously tried, they've stayed within the rules, but it looks like it doesn't look good. Do you think he's right there, Jess? I think I'm asking a leading question, but
I do, and I saw his comments on this. It's an attempt to, it's an attempt to make the rules work the hardest they possibly can for you. And I'm sure we've, we've all been there, but not with the taxpayers' money. There's bending the rules, and then there's fine. It's within the rules. It's just not really within the morality of the rules, is it?
The morality is what we're talking about here to a large extent. So now, as there's in the paper, there is a source close to Miss Braverman. She's offered no official comment, but a source close who is trying to defend it on her behalf says this is completely private matter. No, it isn't. It's being publicly paid, mate, and your staff. Yeah. But confirmed that she paid no rent on her parents' place, so she has no costs in the constituency, if you like. And the source added that because she could be claiming rent of up to £17,000 a year, she was in actual fact saving the taxpayer money by merely claiming £5,000 a year on the marital home's energy bills. But the fact of the matter is, Jess, that if that's the case, why not claim those energy bills in Hampshire rather than Hertfordshire, where she and her husband share that moral responsibility for running and keeping warm their family home? We don't have that responsibility. It is not up to us to fund other people's family homes, especially when they're on more than 80 grand a year starting salary.
Plus, she gets an additional about 70 grand, 67 grand on top of her 84 grand that she gets for being an MP from other earnings per year. So, I mean, she's hardly on the breadline, is she? No. When we're looking at the poor nurses and the teachers who are out striking, who are living on a paycheck that leaves them very little at the end of the month after tax, which has gone to pay her energy bill. It's just galling. It's galling, actually, is what this is. And I'm not, it doesn't matter what political party they're from. I would say about whoever was doing something like this. It's galling. It's very elitist kind of attitude of, well, I can do it. I could get away with it. To turn around and then say, well, it would cost me £17,000 in rent to stay at my parents' home. She's not renting her own home there. She's staying with her parents when she goes there. That asks other questions. I don't know how often she's there.
Well, we've checked that out. It's in the story. Her mileage claims show that she claimed for mileage to the constituency 3 nights a month, although she says she was there more often and just didn't claim mileage.
3 nights a month. Anyone that's going to be charged £17,000 rent by their parents for 3 nights a month is either living in a castle when they go up there, or they've got some very stingy parents. I mean, obviously, no one's going to get charged rent by their parents for 3 nights a month, one would think. So, no. I mean, it's a ridiculous argument in the first place, what she's trying to say. And again, it's trying to make a mug of us.
Exactly. It's worth pointing out her salary as a minister and a home secretary is about £150,000 a year. All right. And that works out to about £12,500 a month. Right. Yes. £3,000 a week for her job, which is very high stress. And I don't deny her that she necessarily is paying that amount of money, but it's £3,000 a week, £12,500 a month. She could, for that amount of money, I could run 2 or 3 homes. All right. I certainly run one on significantly less than that. I could probably manage 2, I'm sure, if I was on £12,000 a month. And the £5,000 energy bill that she's claimed, that's equivalent to £416 a month. Yeah. Now, if you've got £12,500 a month, you can manage 400 quid. You can manage 100 quid a week. I mean, that is just, it's a tiny amount of money in terms of her family wealth. Her parents are wealthy, her husband's wealthy, she's wealthy independently. She can easily afford this. It's 100 quid a week. Some of us would struggle, but she doesn't need to claim it. And she certainly doesn't need to flip it.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, again, it's the look of this. It just stinks. It's just typical kind of, the brass neck of it that we are seeing so much. I mean, it does remind me of Partygate. It reminds me of that kind of sort of, stuff you can't see your loved ones in hospital. We're dancing to ABBA and swinging, because we've had a bad day. We've all had a bad day. It's that kind of, it's that kind of mentality, and I think the country's just had enough of it, Susie. I really do, and I think that's why stories like this, do make an impact, because you're just saying yet again, it's a kind of, well, I can do it, so I'm going to do it and stuff the rest of you kind of attitude that makes you just feel quite so incensed.
Exactly. Now, Dawn says our benefits go up by a few pounds, but then it gets taken away and more by a rise in council tax and rent. This Suella needs to get her priorities right. Now, this is a government which has voted to stop the £20 a week uplift in universal credit. I don't know how Suella voted in that. I suspect she was in the lobbies for the government on that one. And if they're taking 20 quid away in universal credit, I think surely she should manage 100 quid a week out of her own pocket for the energy bills. Really do. But anyway, thank you for your comments, everybody. Just very quickly before we move on, Jess, where do you smell that this story might be going next? I mean, obviously there's thought of looking into other MPs, but do you think there's any chance she might have an investigation, a parliamentary investigation into what she's been up to? She was been forced to resign before now, of course.
You would hope, because of, like you said, the flipping element of this, and that has been a big issue before. You would hope. Really, realistically, what do we expect? I don't know with this. I don't know with this current, government and the current situation. Will they take it further? Will she be able to style it out? They seem to have a particular knack of styling a lot of things out. I mean, look how many things that Boris Johnson sort of managed to get over before, the final sort of push of him to go. A stream of times when we all thought this might be it. He's going to be under questioning for this, or this is going to be, and nothing ever really came to it until after Partygate. It was, so I don't know. I think what would be nice to come of it is people to, ask that question, is it fair? And people to look at themselves and think, actually, is this a good look for me to do this? Okay, I can do it. Should I do it? Those two things are very different, and it's not a good look. Let's try and be a bit more in it together, as we all said during the pandemic, rather than a kind of an us and them between those who have access to his power, have access to his money, and the rest of us who are scrabbling by in this cost of living crisis. It's hitting everyone hard. It would just feel a little bit better to be able to look up, see those in power, and see that they're leading by example, that we're all in this together, trying to get through it, rather than they're in it for themselves, trying to get as much money as possible out of the taxpayer.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Jess. We'll have to sort of see how things go. I don't suppose. What do you think, everybody? What do you think Suella should do about this? What do you think ought to happen next? Obviously, her constituents are going to have the final say in a couple of years' time, but this might all have faded away by then. So what do you think should really happen now? Do you think there should be some kind of amnesty, perhaps, for MPs in which they declare what it is they've been up to and just decide to change their minds? Who knows? Let us know. But first off, we have found some good news in the world, and here it is. Now, the sudden death of Paul O'Grady last week sparked a nationwide sort of tear to the eye and lots of tributes to him, but it seems to have moved many people to donate as well to Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, where he filmed his much-loved For the Love of Dogs TV series for many years, highlighting their fight to rehouse and save abandoned and mistreated animals. Now, we reported last week that the fund had reached 90 grand, but now it's hit 200 grand. Jess, you think this is proof that, not only are we a nation of animal lovers, but O'Grady lovers as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it was shocking last week, and everyone was, very shocked about it, very sad about it. He'd been a sort of big kingpin figure in showbiz for so many years, since the 90s when, Lily Savage. And we all remember, it's so funny. And when you look back at his sort of life and times in his career and the amount of sort of glass ceilings he broke through as well, because we think, now we're all quite used to, sort of RuPaul's Drag Race and all sorts of stuff like that. But at the time when Lily Savage first came on the scene as a mainstream entertainer, getting Saturday night spots, not so much. But everyone sort of really fell for her, Lily. And then when Paul, in sort of around 2002, sort of decided to be more Paul O'Grady and sort of retired Lily, everyone loved him. The stuff he's done with animals over the years has been fantastic. He's always been a big supporter of the Mirror as well. It has to go say he's always been a big Pride of Britain supporter and our Animal Hero Awards. He's always attended them and been great on them. So yes, I mean, we're in, as a nation, I think we've got a big fond space for Paul O'Grady. I think a lot of people loved Paul O'Grady, and he's just been part of the sort of showbiz furniture for so long that I think it was very, very sad and very, very tragic. He was still very young. He's only 67. And it is so tragic. And I think this sort of outpouring of generosity towards a cause which was so important to him. I mean, he loved his dogs, he loved his animals. He had so many of them on his property. He had like pigs and goats and all sorts there, and he was so happy about it. I think it's lovely that the nation's giving their money and giving that donation to such a worthy cause. And I think it does say, look, he is. I know it's a much coined term to say a national treasure, but he really is. When you look at him, you look at his career. I did a lot last week, writing about his career. He's done some marvelous things, and also, he before in the early part, he'd done a lot of campaigning on LGBTQ rights. He lived through that whole stuff. He lost so many friends during the awful AIDS epidemic. He talks so passionately about that. If you read through some of his autobiographies, he lost friends that people wouldn't go and see them. All of that. And he's been through all of that. He's talked about that. He's campaigned on that. He's had such a massive career. And yet it still feels so tragic that it was cut so short when he was, he was on stage like a few days beforehand playing Miss Hannigan in Annie, and loving that role. He's talked about how much he loves playing Miss Hannigan because he can play it so evil and wicked, like an old drunk. He just loved that role. So it seems so sad for someone so full of life and who's been such a staple for sort of British.
Yeah. And really appropriate that he got such big donations in his name after he died to Battersea. Although I did a story about Battersea many years ago, so I walked around and said, is there anything particular that you guys need, that you need fundraising for or anything? And the people who run the home said, we don't need any money because we get left loads of money in people's wills. They always leave money to Battersea. So we're fine, but what we need is, this, that, and the other kind of thing to happen. More people to be aware of this, that, and that thing. So they don't really need cash, although it's lovely that they've got a particular fund for Paul, and I hope they use it for something that he would have liked too. But I think perhaps as well, if you've got a sort of a local smaller shelter that's struggling, an animal shelter, I'm sure that Paul would love it if you gave them a bit of love too, rather than give all your money to Battersea, maybe, because it does have quite a big income already.
I think probably post-pandemic, though, like everywhere is struggling. I think, every charity.
Yeah, they've all got energy bills to pay.
Post-pandemic, especially in this current climate, like look at the bills that they're going to have there, and look at how many animals they're having to take in with everybody giving in their lockdown pets. Like that, it is a big problem for animal charities at the moment, trying to find the money and not close the doors. And obviously if they do have to close the doors, where are those animals going to have to go? That's for all the animal shelters out there. So there's so many good causes at the moment. that is one, support your animal shelters. So I think, it doesn't matter how big they are all in need at the moment, I think.
Yes, they are, definitely. And of course, they don't get help with their energy bills in the same way the Home Secretary does. So it's worth giving your local animal shelter a £5 if you've got one knocking around. All right, Jess, thank you very much for taking us through that. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. We'll let you go now. If you're listening on podcast, please leave us a review so other people can find us. But otherwise, we will see you again on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, tatty bye.
Bye.